Devils head coach Sheldon Keefe did a Q&A with radio play-by-play announcer Matt Loughlin, and I'm going to share some of my main takeaways from that discussion. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Wire for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. My apologies if I sound a little stuffy right now, battling a minor cold, but the show must go on. And if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I hate the month of August when it comes to covering hockey because nothing really happens except for the fact that Patrick Laine is now a Montreal Canadian, and it was recently leaked in a now since deleted video that the Hughes brothers might be the cover of EA Sports NHL 25. And I'll share my thoughts in greater detail in a future episode once that announcement becomes official. But here's my quick thoughts on the NHL franchise that EA Sports puts out year after year after year. I'm not excited, and I don't even think I'm going to buy the game. I don't care if the Hughes brothers are on the cover. It's just because it's going to be a recycled game from last year. They need to show me some sort of change, including maybe changing the Be a Pro feature or the graphics take a big leap. I don't know. I'm not just going to buy the game just because you have a different cover athlete. I'm not going to pay $60 for a roster update. I can put my money to other uses. I love EA Sports. As I told you guys, I've been enjoying College Football 25, their first college football sanctioned video game in 10 years, but their NHL franchise is pretty much dead. That's just my honest opinion, but maybe I'll share more thoughts of the matter once I get more details about the video game. All right. Speaking of video games, I think we're going to get GTA 6 before Dawson Mercer signs a deal at this point. I'm not concerned, but I'm just like, why is it taking so long? That might be a future topic for an episode, but what are we going to discuss in today's episode? Sheldon Keefe recently sat down with radio play-by-play announcer Matt Loughlin and answered some questions from season ticket holders. I will leave a link in the description for the full interview if you want to check it out. I watched the entirety of it. It was 30 minutes long. Sheldon Keefe answered a lot of questions regarding his coaching style, the process of being hired by the Devils, basically just another press conference because I was in attendance for his first official introductory press conference back in late May at the Prudential Center. All right, so I want to share my thoughts and some of the main takeaways I got from that interview. In the first segment, we'll talk about the style in which he likes to coach, and I will share my thoughts on Sheldon Keefe in general. Then in segment 2, he talked about the culture of the Devils, the defensive changes. And then in the third and final segment, we're going to talk about what has been missing from this Devils team from last year compared to 2 seasons ago when they had that historic run. Because their core is still there, but why did they take so many steps backwards? I've had so many Devils content creators on this show within the last few weeks, and their opinions were pretty much the same, but I want to share my thoughts on the matter. But first, let's talk about Sheldon Keefe in general. I talked about this in a previous episode that I was actually quite fond of Sheldon Keefe, and I'm glad that the Devils hired him to be their next head coach. But this might be a controversial take. Of all the problems that the Devils dealt with last season, I don't think coaching was the biggest issue. I'm not saying it was perfect, but NHL coaches have such a short leash compared to some of the other major sports. Like, you're not going to see a Greg Popovich or a Bill Belichick, someone who's been with the same organization for over a decade. That's a rarity because NHL coaches like carousel every 3 or 4 years. And that's why I jokingly said to Jim Behringer and also Christy Flannery that I'm excited for the next 2 or 3 years of Sheldon Keefe being a head coach for the Devils. But in all seriousness, I think Lindy Ruff sometimes got more hate than he deserved. And before you come at me on social media, let me just explain. When Lindy Ruff was first hired by the Devils, it was July 2020 when I took over the show. And the expectations for the Devils, not really all that high. But keep in mind, the NHL and other leagues are coming from a pandemic. And it was sometimes hard to maintain the health of your team because of COVID protocols. Unfortunately for Lindy Ruff, he was put into an unfair circumstance. And then the following year, 2021, 2022, the Devils dealt with many injuries yet again, especially towards the end, in which Jack Hughes didn't finish off the season. I think Jesper Bratt was dealing with something. Miles Wood, he was injured for most of the year. I know I'm forgetting a few players, but I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. And then 2022, 2023, everyone is pretty much healthy, and the Devils have a good run. They have a historic run, the most wins in team history, which is saying a lot considering that the Devils are 3-time Stanley Cup champions. And then this past season, injuries yet again, and they struggled. I'm not saying Lindy Ruff was perfect. I'm not saying that I don't like the change. I'm just saying that take it a little easy on Lindy Ruff because for most of his Devils tenure behind the bench, he's never really had a healthy roster to work with. And it's kind of hard to coach when it's basically a revolving door of players, rotations, goalies, you name it. But similar to what Christy said when she appeared on this show, usually changing the coach gives fans an idea that there's been a big change, but we saw that not to be the case when Travis Green took over and pretty much the Devils were still dealing with their issues. But anyway, going to Sheldon Keefe. He talked with Matt Loughlin about his style, and here's what he had to say.
How would you describe your coaching style?
I don't know. You know what? Of course, anytime you go through a process trying to get hired, it's a struggle to talk about yourself. I mean, that's one thing I don't love to do, quite honestly. And a lot of that I would say is because it doesn't really matter how I feel about myself. It really matters how the people that you're impacting, how they feel when they're being led by you. So it's a tough question to answer, other than to say that I care about people. I care about what we're doing. I commit everything that I have to make people, and in this case, our team or organization, the best it possibly can be. I'm committed to that fully. And sometimes that's pushing and inspiring people. Sometimes that's challenging in them and telling them things that they need to hear, maybe don't want to hear, but need to hear, being honest and being direct with that. And I think I've gained a lot of experience. I've coached at essentially every level that there is to coach at, from junior hockey to the American League to the NHL. I still like to think of myself as a young coach in our sport. Yet I believe I've got lots of great experience that I can lean on, and a tremendous coaching staff as well that I've come to know and respect greatly, that will support me. So, I think the players and the fans can expect a guy that's going to be honest and direct, yet is going to be mindful of what I say and how I act and how it could impact the group.
Okay. Sheldon Keefe said it's kind of hard to talk about yourself in that regards, but I will go to bat for him. I think his style is that he knows how to run a high-octane offense, and that's exactly what the Devils need because he saw great success in Toronto. Now, can he translate it over to New Jersey? And personally, I think he's able to do that because the Devils, they upgraded their goaltending, their defense. They added more depth in terms of forwards. We'll talk about that a little later in the episode. And while it's not really up to par to Toronto's core four, which, by the way, congratulations to Austin Matthews for now being named the next captain for the Maple Leafs, taking over John Tavares. And that puts Tavares's, I guess, legacy, if you would. People were questioning his captaincy the past few years, and now Austin Matthews, the best player on the Maple Leafs, is the next captain. Anyway, I'm not locked on Leafs. Going back to Sheldon Keefe and the Devils have a core four that Sheldon Keefe can work with, and their defense has improved. I think if Sheldon Keefe can do what he did with Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, I think it could translate well to Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and also Timo Meier. All four of those guys, relatively young, have some NHL experience under their belt. They're starting to shift over from not so much experience to now you got to consider them veterans in the NHL, believe it or not, because Nico Hischier is getting close to 10 years at the NHL level. And Jesper Bratt and Jack Hughes, I think both of them have about 5 years of NHL experience under their belt. And Timo Meier, we know what he did with the Sharks and now transitioning over to the Devils the past couple seasons. I think Sheldon Keefe is going to do just fine with his style of coaching with the Devils. And while Sheldon Keefe wasn't my first choice, I would have went with Craig Berube. But obviously, Berube being a Canadian, he had to take the opportunity to become the next head coach for the Maple Leafs. I don't blame him. And people were questioning Berube's attitude and how it could translate to the players. I just said, ask Jake Allen, who was a part of that St. Louis Blues team that won the Stanley Cup when Berube was at the helm. Digressing a little bit, I think Sheldon Keefe was still a good option for the Devils. And I didn't think he was going to get fired, but lo and behold, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Now, before we dive even further into this Q&A with Sheldon Keefe and Matt Loughlin, I want to tell you guys about Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. I have actually used Indeed to book myself some play-by-play gigs, use it to this very day. And listeners of the show will get $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support my show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. All right. Sheldon Keefe was asked about the culture for the Devils and also the defensive changes because I think it intertwines with one another. I will play both those sound bites back to back. Here's what he had to say.
What have you seen, and what parts of the Devils culture would you like to continue and extend, and what parts might you want to change?
Well, I think that's been a great process, learning more about what's gone on to this point, what's been established, the personalities within the room, both on a staffing level and from a player perspective. That's something that I haven't necessarily gone through. My hire in Toronto with the Maple Leafs came mid-season and was I was elevated from the American Hockey League to the NHL. Prior to being hired by the Toronto Marlies, I was hired mid-season, coming from the junior A level to the OHL into the Ontario Hockey League and Sault Ste. Marie mid-season. I've never had a full off season like this to really fully be able to take advantage of the time and learn as much as you can, and still learning every single day, of course. Even when the players come in, you'll learn each day. You'll have some opinions and some thoughts and things that have happened. But once you start working with people one-on-one or seeing them in their element, you learn even more. But the culture, what I would say is, first of all, has got terrific people and starts at the top. Spending time with David Blitzer, and through the process of being hired, you could see, how passionate he is for Devils hockey in general, sports in general. He is a great competitor and great supporter, and has been terrific in leading things. And then all the way through the organization, there's just been great people to learn from. And talking to the players, I think there's a real culture and expectation of winning here.
What defensive changes might you be implementing? And you referenced some of the additions there, Brett Pesce coming along and Brendan Dillon as well. So what might you change to decrease scoring chances against, which was a bit of a bugaboo last year from a Devils perspective?
Yeah, it's no doubt this is going to be a focus from day one for us, and it's the foundation of any successful team. There's no question about that. I mean, there's a lot of elite teams in the NHL at generating and producing offense, and the New Jersey Devils certainly are one. We'll continue to lean in on that. That's a big part of who we are, without a doubt. But as I say, the foundation of any successful team is the ability to defend its net and keep pucks out of the net ultimately. So that'll be a major priority and focus for us. That has to be a big part of our identity. It's got to be difficult to get to our net and get to our goaltenders. Obviously, we've got a great belief in our goal and in the goalies, and Markstrom coming over to take the lead for us there and to partner with Jake Allen. And we've got great support and great experience and leadership in goal. But we're going to support those guys. We're going to be committed as a group to make it a lot harder to get to our net. So there's going to be some tactical things that will change inside of that, some of the structures. But really, it's going to be more about a mindset for the team and committing to it. And I think every player knows that how important that is. But it's about us really putting it at the forefront and embracing it as a foundation to our team and what we do, and then allow our offense and our difference-making ability to come through. But we want to make sure that there's a real strong foundation there, and that'll be established from day one to camp.
Okay. Let's touch on the culture soundbite first, because that was a question asked to a lot of the new additions for the Devils, courtesy of Bill Spalding of MSG. He asked that to Brendan Dillon, Brett Pesce, Stefan Nason, Tomas Tatar. That was Bill's question for all of them, which is the culture here in New Jersey. Here's the thing. I think the Devils have an established culture for many years. I think a lot of the old school fans can touch on this, which is the Devils like to play hard, but that's been missing the past couple seasons, and we saw it on full display during the playoffs. In the words of Jersey Joe, the Devils need some more Sasquatches out there. Sometimes they're a little too soft, and I think that's what a lot of people have been complaining about, and that's why people were excited when Timo Meier was added. And Tom Fitzgerald saw the criticism, and he added some more physical assets like Stefan Nason, Paul Cotter, Brendan Dillon, guys who are a lot more physical and can assert themselves in more ways than one. And to his credit, at one point during the season, he added Curtis McDermott. That's a name that we haven't really talked about the last few weeks because it's been buried underneath all the other news. But I want to give Curtis McDermott some credit as well, because when Matt Rempe was playing a little too dirty for some Devils fans' liking, he had to pay the piper, especially what he did to Dawson Mercer and Jonas Siegenthaler. Matt Rempe had to pay, and he did pay his dues on one fateful afternoon at Madison Square Garden when opening puck drop, Curtis McDermott dropped the mitts, and he and Matt Rempe went toe-to-toe, and we saw some other players get into the mix. There were a lot of ejections. Probably one of the more memorable moments from a very abysmal season. And Curtis McDermott, once again, not afraid to throw his body around, but if we're being realistic here, most likely Curtis McDermott won't play in all the games if the Devils are good, but you add some more physicality, like I said, because this organization has seen the likes of Ken Danico, Scott Stevens, a lot of physical players out there. In fact, I had another former Devils defenseman on this show, the great Bruja. Bruce Stryver appeared on this show, And he was a part of that Stanley Cup roster that defeated the Detroit Red Wings in 1995. That gave the Devils their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. And that Red Wings team had many Hall of Famers on that roster, and yet the Devils came away with a sweep. There's a reason why, of all the retired numbers hung at the Prudential Center, only one of them is a Ford, and that is Patrick Elias. And there's also a reason why Jack Hughes currently holds the record for most points in a single season with 99. It's because the Devils haven't been known for their offense. They've been known for their defense, but this style of the NHL has changed so much that you basically can't touch someone without going to the penalty box. But anyway, I think the culture for Devils has always been there. And I think some of the old school fans, just based on what I've seen on social media, want them to go back to that just a little bit more. And I agree to an extent, which is this Devils team was sometimes a little too soft. And we'll talk more about that in segment 3. But the defensive changes, and by the way, shout out to Matt Loughlin, bugaboo. I might have to start using that a little bit more. But defensive changes, you took a lot of the burden off the shoulders of Nemitz and Hughes when you added more depth and experience in Brett Pesce, Brendan Dillon, Jonathan Kovacevic. Don't sleep on him. And I'm excited to see what Seamus Casey can do. And similar to what Chico Resch said when he appeared on this show, it doesn't matter who you have in the net. Like Connor Hellebuck won the Vezina Trophy a few months ago. Yet what happened to the Winnipeg Jets during the playoffs? Did they make it to the Stanley Cup? Or here's another example. Stuart Skinner, wasn't he sent down to the AHL at one point by the Oilers? And what happened? They almost pulled off the impossible, overcoming a 3-0 deficit and actually winning it. I feel like people put too much pressure on goalie shoulders to carry the load of the burden. Doesn't matter if you have good goaltending, solid goaltending, mediocre goaltending, horrendous goaltending. If you don't have good defense in front of them or a good roster structure, period, you're not really going to get that far. And so I'm glad that Sheldon Keefe touched on that a little bit. And I think this Devils defensive core will certainly take a few steps forward. And similar to what Brendan Dillon told me during his respective press conference, he said he might be a little biased, but he says that this team defensively has to be one of the best in the NHL in terms of defensive core. And we're going to talk more about what was that missing link for the Devils momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Okay, to close out today's episode, and if you're watching on YouTube, I greatly apologize for the amount of sunlight that's entering my office right now. Unfortunately, can't control the sun, and I forgot my Devils flag backdrop over in Arizona, so I have to retrieve and get that. Usually I put that up on the window to block out the sunlight, but the show must go on. We're going to play the sound bites in which Sheldon Keefe touched on the missing link for the Devils and also their physicality, something I touched on a few minutes ago. Take a listen.
What was the team missing last year that they had the year before, do you think? And how do you take this dynamic young group and get them back where they were?
Well, I think there's so many different things you can look at, and you know, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time looking backwards, quite frankly. You know, I've done my work in doing that to try to be as informed as I can about what's occurred. But yeah, if you really look at it, at a snapshot from last season, there's a lot of different things. Obviously the team had a lot of injury situations to very key players. It was bringing along some young defensemen that were going through some growing pains, and because of injuries, were probably put into situations that weren't maybe necessarily the plan.
What is the addition of guys like Dillon and Pesci, some of the snarl that Cotter will bring? How does that help?
Well, the players you mentioned, of course, do change sort of the identity of the group a little bit, no question, and you'll rely on those guys to bring it. But I look at physicality; it comes in different forms in our game, and different players have their own version of physicality that they can bring. But at its root for me, the term physicality in our game really is looking at it as a tool in our game to drive your competitiveness and to give you an advantage in the game. And each player brings that in their own way.
Okay, to close out today's episode, let me leave you with these thoughts. I loved all the answers that Sheldon Keefe was given because I think he gets the narrative of it, which is I don't think this Devils team was necessarily bad. They just ran into some bad luck, similar to what I said in segment 1 when talking about Lindy Ruff. They just never were healthy. And when you're missing some of your key assets, sometimes it is hard to win consistently, but at least the Devils at some points were able to keep their head above water, and you're treading on the water. You got to do whatever it takes to keep your head above it so that way you don't sink. And the Devils weren't mathematically eliminated from playoff contention until there was a few weeks left in the season, if we're being completely honest. I'm excited to see what this Devils team could do with all the new additions they made, from their defense to their physicality to their goaltending. And this is something we're going to touch on in a future episode. My expectations for some of these players, like, can Jack Hughes just stay healthy so that way he can finally reach 100 points? Is Brendan Dillon right in his assessment that the Devils defensive core is one of the best in the NHL? We'll just have to wait and see, but I'm excited to see what Sheldon Keefe can do. And let me know what you guys think. What did you think of the Q&A alongside Matt Loughlin and Sheldon Keefe? Once again, I will leave a link in the description below if you want to check out the full interview, but I basically took some of my favorite sound bites from the discussion and shared my opinions. So leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.